Hey guys, Skill Paris here, and earlier this week I'd asked you guys on Facebook what you wanted to see in a video tutorial on producing and production, and we got some really great things. Instead of doing all these all in one video, which is what I really wanted to do, I started doing that and got about 35 minutes in without even showing you like half of what I wanted to do. So instead of doing that, I'm going to focus each video on one certain subject and just do it that way, which I think will be a lot better and make these videos a lot shorter, because I want to give you the most information that you can use in the shortest amount of time. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm using Massive here in Ableton, of course, and start off we're just going to make a kind of like a bass wobble, and to do that let me just show you just some key things before we get started here in Massive. The envelope 4 here, that is your master envelope. So usually when I get into a sound, the first thing I do is I click on this level here and just crank it up so that the bass is coming out nice and strong and even. And also here in the voicing, since we're doing a bass, I think by default it's set to polyphonic, but I usually set it to monophonic and legato thriller. And over here in the OSC tab, you have your glide and portamento. So I usually just give it a little bit of that. Here is our oscillator 1, which that's what's giving us our sound right now. And here's your filter select of where the signal from this oscillator is going. And right now it's going to both filter 1 and 2, and if you drag it all the way down it'll go right here to filter 2 and all the way up to filter 1. So we're going to go ahead and set it at filter 1, and here is your level for your filter. So we're going to crank that all the way up, and we're going to select the scream filter for this particular sound. So go ahead and bring the cutoff up right about right there so we can kind of hear what we're doing. Also the scream and a little bit of resonance. And now we're going to start modulating some of these parameters to make it start to wobble. So we're going to click on LFO 5 here, and we can assign any of these envelopes in any of these LFOs or the performer or stepper to any of these parameters here. You see where these little boxes are. And how we do that is we just click on this little compass looking thing, click and drag, and just drop it in any one of these boxes. And then to set the amount of the modulation, you click and hold and either drag up or down. So we're going to do that about there. Let's see what that sounds like. And by default your LFO will not be synced to the tempo of your session, but that can offer for some pretty creative sound design effects. We're going to go ahead and sync it, which is just by clicking this button here, and also we're going to click the restart, which means that the LFO is going to restart every time you hit a note. So you always have that attack as opposed to this. So we're also going to assign the LFO to some of the scream. And what else? Let's also assign it to the wavetable position here. Just to make the sound a little more interesting. And so, yeah, that's really easy. I mean, there's a bass wobble right there. Granted, it's not all that great, and you know, you probably wouldn't really use this in a song just because it's not up to par. But from here, I'll kind of show you the some of the key things that I use pretty much in all my basses and how to get some really fat sounds. So in FX1, they have the classic tube, teletube, and the Bronner tube, and these are just distortion effects, and I use one of these in pretty much every sound just to give it some real nice growl. And so you can tell just that to, I mean, that's pretty weak, so you turn that on, it just really fattens it up. And in FX2 There's a reverb. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in here. You can go through these and kind of find what you like and what each bass kind of calls for. But I use the dimension expander for a lot of sounds just because it's kind of like a spreader to where it kind of widens things up. Just kind of puts it in a space and gives it that kind of, it's like a reverb, but I think it fattens things up a little bit more. And here in the voicing tab, you have how many voices the sound has, and I usually do either 1 or 3. Turn the dimension expander down just a little bit. And we also have our pan position, which will spread the sound a little bit. And your pitch cutoff, which kind of is like a unison, kind of like a unison sound to where it kind of detunes the voices. Again, for a wide sound, you might want to use a little bit of that. And the wavetable position too, depending on what oscillators you're using, this can give you some interesting sound effects. Cool, so it's starting to sound pretty decent now. And here in the modulation oscillator, the phase I use quite a bit on sounds, and to get that going, you just click on phase and click on oscillator 1 because it's the only oscillator that we're using right now. And now let's just mess with this parameter. And let's assign the LFO to that just a little bit. That really fattens it up. Kind of adds some higher harmonics to the sound. And also down here in the inserts, the sine shaper is another great little distortion tool. And if you're wanting to do those kind of yoi sounds or the yai sounds, the sample and hold is great to do that. If we bring the cutoff down, usually with those sounds, your cutoff's going to be a little bit lower than it normally is, but you're going to crank the resonance up pretty high to where you get the definition in those vowel frequency areas. So let's go ahead and bring this back to resonance down. So now that we have that, that's pretty much good enough to work with right now. Let's go ahead and just record a little MIDI part for this. So let's start right here. Actually, let's go into this view over here. So I'm just going to record a little clip real quick. Okay, so that's great. Nothing too fancy, but let's bring this back over here. So let's rename this bass, which to rename any track in Ableton is just, you just click on the track and Apple R and type in whatever you want. So that's going to be our main bass, and what I'm going to do here is using Ableton's auto filter. I'm going to just cut off a little bit of the lows here. Put it on high pass and cut around, it depends on the sound, usually around 90 or even 80 sometimes, or higher, depending on the sound again. And over here in this MIDI track, I have an operator, which is just sending out a pure sine wave. Which if you which is just the sub of that. And as you can see here, I have a low pass filter, and it's cutting at about 70 hertz. And so now I'm going to copy, which is just Option, click and drag the MIDI clip. And now what's going to happen when I play this is that the sub is going to be playing these notes, the exact same thing that the bass is playing, but since we've cut out all the high frequencies on the sub, and on this bass we've cut out all the very low frequencies, the sub is going to stay very constant the entire time. And a lot of times in massive, when you start to distort some of the oscillators and make really nasty sounds, you know, all that distortion is up in the higher end of the frequency spectrum as opposed to the low end, so you kind of start to lose some of the low end. But splitting it like this to where you have a sub that's carrying all that low information, you're never going to lose that. So then once you compress these two together, as you see, like these tracks are grouped and their main output is coming out of this group. So then we can compress them together to make it really, really fat. And this helps so much with bass sounds, and especially when you have like a really, really nasty bass and massive, you know, sometimes you lose that low end and it can sound really nasty, but if you don't have that low end to kind of give it its real, you know, powerful sound, it's not gonna sound good. So let's just hear what these sound like together. So yeah, that's it's a nasty bass. And usually once I have this, there's a couple different ways to do this. Since these are all separated, I'll usually just, you know, this is kind of layering already, but I'll usually kind of do this thing that I call micro mastering to sounds, which is, I'm finding that it really helps with getting stuff to sound fat and sound really just nasty, which is kind of like what, you know, with a lot of dubstep and even some of the electro house now, that's kind of what you're going for anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to, first off, actually I'm getting ahead of myself here, with all of your bass sounds, anything that you make in Massive or any plugin or any synthesizer, save your presets, because this is one thing that with analog synthesizers you never had the you know, you could never really save presets. You just kind of had to either try to remember how you made that, or, you know, take a picture of all the parameters. And, you know, with analog synthesizers it's hard to get the exact same sound 2 times in a row. But with digital synths we can, you know, we have the ability to do total recall, which is great. So use it to your advantage. So I'm just going to save this as new tutorial sound. And as you can see, I've made a folder where I save all my Massive presets. And if we open up that, we'll go to Open Sound. See in here I have tons and tons and tons and tons of presets that I've made. And really, a lot of the times I'll take, you know, every couple weeks or whenever I get some free time, just take that time to just focus on making bass sounds, as opposed to making a sound in Massive and then trying to add some drums and then, you know, try to build a song. Just focus on just making sounds, just making presets. And when you do that, then when you go to make an actual song, you've already got your presets there, you already have the sound design done, so you're focusing more on the actual writing of the song as opposed to trying to get the bass sound to sound just right. You know, you can kind of get something really cool started, but then you start focusing too much on the actual mixing of the sound, and then it's just like, you know, you've kind of lost your inspiration, you're kind of over it. So if you spend time actually doing the sound design first before you even get into the songwriting mode, it'll help writing songs by, you know, speeding up your process, and it'll make your stuff a lot better because you're not focusing on the actual sounds so much because they already sound good. You're just focusing on your inspiration and, you know, turning those sounds into songs. So save your presets, and also freezing tracks is a really great way to also save CPU, and just it gives you a little bit more creative freedom to chop stuff up and pitch certain things and affect different things. So To freeze a track, we're just going to control click and freeze track. And essentially what freezing is it's bouncing audio but inside of Ableton. So normally in like Pro Tools or something like that, if you wanted to turn a MIDI part into an audio part, you would either have to set up a track to record the input of that track and record that, and then you'd still have your MIDI there, or you would have to bounce that certain section of the song out onto your desktop, take it from your desktop and bring it back into Pro Tools. But with Ableton, you can do this all under the hood without having to go through that whole process. So once it's frozen, you'll see it's actually frozen. It looks like Sub-Zero just froze it up for you. So control click and flatten, and then now it'll just be the audio. Cool. So now, as I was saying with what I call micro mastering, I'm going to use iZotope's Ozone, which is an amazing plugin. Like I used this for mastering in like 2008 or 9, like when I really started to do electro house, and like I liked it at first because it would make it, I was just using it for mastering, just running my songs through it, and it would just make everything really fat and really loud. But the more I got to kind of listening to my stuff, it does bring up the high end, especially since I wasn't really mixing my stuff all that great back then. I was kind of over it, so I haven't used it since like 2009 or 2008, and I'm just starting to get into it these last couple months. And instead of using it as just mastering, using it to master each one of your sounds. So a lot of times I'll get a kick drum going and maybe EQ it a little bit and then throw the Ozone on it and limit it and make it sound really fat just from the get-go, instead of if you wait till mastering to make everything sound good, you've already screwed up, because it should sound good from the beginning. There's not any one process you're going to do when you're writing a song that's going to make everything sound great just in the blink of an eye. You're not just going to turn the magic plug-in on and it's going to be like, oh, it's a great song now, it sounds awesome. You have to start with it sounding good. So each sound, make sure it sounds good before you just start putting a bunch of stuff in there and it's going to sound like crap eventually. So here we're just going to kind of go through some of the presets and just make this sound super fat. And maybe the coolest thing about Ozone here, which is something that I've been trying to do more and more, is that it has a frequency spectrum on every one of the little effects it has in here, which is great because you can see what's peaking, what's not peaking, and see kind of where everything's going, especially if you're mixing in a bad room, which I'm constantly mixing in a crappy room. So it's nice to be able to visualize it on the computer and actually see what kind of the stuff that you're actually not hearing, since your room maybe is crap. So the multi-band stereo imaging is great because you can widen up sound. So if we just delay these bands here a little bit, really opens it up. And also the loudness maximizer here is essentially it's like a limiter that will really just crush your sounds and make them sound fat and full. So if we kind of just bring this down, that compared to I think it needs a little bit more kind of some mid-range stuff there. Okay, so then once we have that, Ozone does take up quite a bit of CPU, so I just go through and again freeze this track. And we're also going to flatten it. So yeah, and then after that, depending on how your workflow goes, then obviously there would be a beat with it, and you can kind of go through and make more sounds that way. And really, taking the time and focusing on each certain sound will help you so much in the long run, because if you just start off with a sound that doesn't sound good and you're like, oh well, maybe I can fix it later and make it sound good later, by the time later comes around, it's going to be too late, because you'll find you get to this point where it's kind of the point of no return, to where either if it sounds bad and you are trying to make it sound better but you're kind of going the wrong way about it, it's just kind of going to fall to pieces. So keeping that in mind, just always focus on one sound at a time, and just from the very first thing you put in your set, if it's like a kick drum, focus on that kick drum, make sure it sounds great, and get it using ozone, using compression and other stuff, get it sounding fat from the beginning, and then freeze that, do just like we did here. You can throw it in a drum rack and then start with the snare, and kind of do that process over and over with each thing. And what's kind of great about doing this micro mastering, just as I did on this the bass sound here, is if you do this on every single sound is pretty level, and so it kind of takes, you really don't do all that much mastering, because everything's already about at the right level from the get-go. So it helps a lot. And in the next video, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but probably we'll do like drum layering and stuff, and also do some sidechain compression with that. So I hope you guys got something out of this, and hit me up on the Facebook page if you guys want to see anything in these videos, and we'll see you next time.